So hello, we will be discussing chapter 9 from the book IFS Therapy for Shame and Guilt by Sweezy, and especially pages from 158 to 169. Let's begin the discussion. 143 to 169 pages, okay. Chapter 9, Unblend. Thank you, Mark.
Yep.
Yeah, Anne?
I had a question about the exercise on 158, which was the game with the crystal balls.
Yes.
So they talk about each part having their own bin full of crystal balls, and the self, who is dressed in a cloak of sunlight, also is next to a big bin full of crystal balls filled with sunlight. And then they exchange crystal balls, self and parts exchange crystal balls. And the self will take them in one by one. So the parts will roll their crystal balls to the self, who will take them in one by one. So take in the crystal balls one by one, reflect on them, and send a sunlit crystal ball with a special message back to the part. Parts may want to hold the crystal ball from the self, put them in their heart, or store them someplace, and they can keep and absorb them forever. I guess I felt like it was very missed a lot of description. What's going on? Is this just the messages of gratitude or messages of acknowledgement, or what is this exercise trying to facilitate? Is it the same thing as when the self talks to parts in a client session and just done in a crystal ball form? I don't know. I feel like she left out a lot of details. What does everyone else think? Was it clear to everyone else?
I guess it starts at the bottom of page 157, and it says it's an unblending game. And the goal of the game is to help parts get to know the self and help the self get to know parts. And that when it comes to your parts, it says any part that wants to participate can, but parts that would rather just watch the game and not participate can kind of be sitting in the bleachers, because they make an analogy of a basketball court here at one point. And it says, to back up what I just said about a basketball court, if you can imagine that, or whatever, a soccer field or whatever, the setup. It says, let's picture a big space that will accommodate everyone who wants to play. Who's everyone that wants to play? Who is everyone that wants to play? That's all the parts that you have become familiar with and are trying to work with, and your capital S self. Does that make sense? Then you divide the space in two, like a basketball court. On one side of the basketball court, the client's self faces towards the client's parts, who are on the other side. So this is analogous to when we had sit around a kitchen table or something and some parts and stuff, but this is like a bigger thing in a basketball court. But the self is on one side and the parts are on the other side, it says. Then it says for the self. Next to the self, who is dressed in a cloak of sunlight, is a big bin full of crystal balls that are filled with sunlight. So we got this big bin full of crystal balls. What are the crystal balls going to be doing? Then it says for the parts. The parts actually have their own bin that's also full of crystal balls. So now you got the self on one side next to a big bin of crystal balls. You got the parts on the other side next to a big bin of crystal balls. And I guess there's some sort of clothing tailor. Is that what that means? With cloaks to hand out. The cloaks come in all the colors of the rainbow. And then all of your parts that you've imagined that are on one side of the court. Okay, choose a cloak. The tailor will help you put it on or help you choose the color for you. So choose a cloak, and then take a crystal ball and put their chosen rainbow color in the ball, along with a private message for the self. And so this, I guess, the crystal ball is going to contain something that they want to communicate to the self. Does that sound like what it's talking about? Meanwhile, the self is putting a private message for each part so the self is looking across the basketball court at all these parts. And these parts are putting on cloaks, and they're putting messages in a crystal ball, and the self pulls out crystal balls and says, okay, I'm going to put a message for this part that I see over here that's wearing the blue cloak. I'm going to put that message into a crystal ball. And then you exchange crystal balls. So the whole idea of this game is the self communicating with the parts and the parts communicating with the self. Each part in its own way. The self might be conveying things like, you're safe with me and stuff, and I'm excited to learn anything that you feel comfortable and safe, telling me about. So I can't wait to get the crystal ball and stuff like that. And the part may be saying, I'm really scared and hurt or angry and tell something about that part that the self would need to know. Or I guess some of them might be saying, what was it? Any part who wants to, maybe some part saying, I'm just going to watch. Don't put me into this game. I just want to watch and see what happens with everybody else. And so then it's got the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bullets. But I think it's helpful to slow down, and even if you read it, to reread it and go through it, as opposed to what does this mean? So I hope this was helpful to slow it down, because now I've got a much clearer idea about what's going on, and maybe you can ask your question again, or somebody else can give an answer. So anyway.
So, yeah, great, Mark, that you explained it, and you put context into it. But so what I'm thinking, page 164, it says under the subtitle play, it says play is an inherently curious, engaged activity. So I think with the crystal balls, this technique, it reminds me of a hypnotic technique. And there's a lot of play around that. So play, what is it? Play is a quality of the self as well. And also in page 164, under the subtitle play, it says young parts love to play, and all of the options mentioned earlier can be playful. So everything, all the techniques, the dial, the mirror, all the techniques you mentioned in this chapter can be playful. So it's interesting to engage your imagination and engage with self and parts in a more playful quality. And by doing that, we bring self more of the energy of self online. That's my understanding.
Yeah, that makes sense. Both very helpful. Mark, reading it through slowly helped me visualize the experience, which made it make more sense. And then Vana, what you added about playful and adding a sense of ritual or even like sanctity to these images. So it's kind of like we're exchanging not just a normal conversation, but one with deep respect and with lights and with color, and it's a very special, and kind of making that space for the conversation between self and parts. more special in terms of expressiveness. Yeah, I could see now why that's a nice visualization in a playful and kind of ritualizing way of facilitating dialogue between self and parts. So yeah, thank you.
Yes, Marlene?
Hello. There's something aesthetically beautiful about this. You know, I'm a visual person like a lot of you. The visual part really intrigues me. It's so beautiful, and it's such a great fantasy. The self being like the sunlight, you know, and in 12-step meetings, the sunlight is looked upon as this huge power, the sunlight of the spirit, you know, and with alcohol, it's the spirit that's lost. You know, I also love Jung, you know, who says spirit over spiritus or something, you know, Mark probably knows about that. That's a saying, I may have it wrong, but it reminds me of a strong spirit, something very beautiful and powerful like sunlight. And we need the sunlight, we need the self, and the self is always there. And every part in all these colors, every color and every nuance of color, because I love color, wow, and all these cloaks flowing. And right now my colors are green and blue because I'm overly energetic and overly passionate, and I need to slow down from the red, you know, mix it with other colors. So now I'm green and blue for cool and calm, and patient. And the parts receive, you know, I can see my parts receiving this huge yellow sunlight. And yellow is not one of my favorite colors. I rarely pick yellow for, I don't know why. Because I'm more living, I think, from the shadow side. You know, I'm more into the night and the stars. Like last night, it was a clear night and the stars were incredible. I hadn't seen them in a long time. So that was a huge visual. And the sunlight is a little bit sometimes overbearing, you know, overly real, overly warm, and so I tend to hide in the shadows. But the self giving to my parts in this bright, vibrant sunlight that I don't have to hide from is pretty incredible. I'd like to draw some of it. Thank you very much. I'm finished.
Marlene, great. I found that really useful, mentioning the color, the importance of color in that little technique with the crystal ball, and how important color is. And I often use color. In hypnosis, we use color quite a lot. But I would use color. What color is the exile? For example, the exile feels sadness. Where is that sadness? Oh, it's in her back. What color would that be? Can you assign a color? Oh, that would be like maybe black or purple or whatever. Okay, how would you like to get rid of that black color? And it's so much easier when you assign a color. Playful and easier to work with it, to process it. And then when we have something positive from the self, a positive quality coming into the exile, again, what color would that be? What would the exile want? Or would want safety or love? What color would that be? How would you want that color around you or around this part? So it's so I love using color. It makes it so real rather than, emotions are out there. It's like an energy. You can't really touch it. So I'm complete.
Color takes you back to your childhood in a way too, because we all played with crayons and watercolors and things. And in our childhood at home and in elementary school, at least, I think most of us did. So color and a lot of the issues stem back to your childhood. So, childhood trauma. So that's kind of brilliant too, I think, for this game and the colors. And then I put bullet 2 from page 158 in the comments there. Parts will roll their crystal balls back to the self across that gymnasium, who will take them one by one, look at the crystal ball, reflect on the crystal ball, and send a sunlit crystal ball. Like I'm throwing some light on this. The sun warms, the sun is going to cause everything to become green as we move into the springtime here. Send a sunlit crystal ball with a special message back to the part. And that reminds me of Plato, the Greek philosopher's parable of the cave, where we turn and we're just seeing shadows. And when we turn towards the sunlight, at first it's painful, it's uncomfortable, you're not used to it, because that's kind of, to me, that's an analogy of unblending from a part, is turning towards the sunlight and the self helping you to understand and make friends with that part. I'm complete.
I want to change topic a little bit and talk about self and unblending. So I've made a note of many pages, and I'm gonna try to have some kind of flow from my ideas. I'll try to get the flow somewhere. So page 143. I'll try and find that. And it's where it says blending and unblending. That's the subtitle. The second line. If there is no self to lead and protective parts or teams of them compete, the mind becomes chaotic. Blended protectors hold forth, hogging the spotlight. So what do we mean? Martha Sweezy here, she means when she says blended, when you feel blended, it means that there is no self to lead. So that's how you're blended. There's no self. The mind becomes chaotic. And they are at the forefront. They are hogging the spotlight. So there's no self energy. And then what happens though when you have self? I love how she talks about the self. Page 152 is, I'll mention a few things. I can find. Under unblending and the persuasion of exiles. Halfway, it says, page 152, yeah? It says here, the self is a calming counterforce, a ballasted boat in rough waters. And then it says also here, I'm noticing, we can help exiles unblend even when they've taken over completely. And I love this metaphor. It's a ballasted boat in rough waters. Page 155, she talks about self is co-regulating. So halfway under the thing, under the subtitle, walking polarized parts back from the edge with unblending. Almost halfway, it says, with the self's co-regulating presence, or as Linehan says, wise mind. An appropriate age hierarchy reasserts itself in the internal system, and older parts begin to bring all they have learned to the project of continuing to learn. This is quite very interesting, actually. It's okay, I'll stay here for a moment. If you guys go to page 155, she says, less obvious, perhaps, is the matter of who will be responsible going forward. Do we still have protective parts after exiles unblend? If we don't need young parts to learn new skills, who will learn? And then a couple of lines down, she says, with the self's co-regulating presence or the wise mind, an appropriate age hierarchy reasserts itself in the internal system, and all the parts begin to bring all they have learned to the project of continuing to learn. So that's an example of learning. What happens if your exiles are healed? Who learns then, if not the young parts? Because they healed. It's still a little bit difficult to. I would need. I don't know. Does that make any sense to you guys here about what happens? Who's responsible going forward? If we are unburdened, if we unburden all the exiles, who takes care of learning? For example, learning, yeah. And then I think my understanding is protectors or managers or whatever. There are parts there they will learn, but there will be more age appropriate, and the self will co-regulate. I'm not sure it's the best example, but I want to just, if I'm one more little thing, I will. I want to talk about self, page 144, last bit. Sorry, I think I'm just the last thing. Page 144. It talks about the window of tolerance. We can, as Schwartz teaches, achieve what Daniel Siegel calls the window of tolerance, a regulated nervous system, by helping extreme parts unblend. So what I'm getting the sense is that the self co-regulates, the self helps achieve the window of tolerance, and you don't really need any other coping mechanisms. Any thoughts around that?
Can you say more, Vana, what you meant when you said they don't need any more coping mechanisms?
Yeah, well, because, you know, it says we can achieve the window of tolerance by helping the extreme parts, by unburdening the exiles. You don't need to learn, you know, it's IFS does not believe in, you know, learning how to cope with things, you know, learning maybe like coping mechanisms, like, you know, deep breathing or something, yeah, unless the part needs that. But it feels it's inherent, you know, the parts know what they need and they want. You don't have to teach them new things. The presence of self is enough to regulate them, to bring them into this window of tolerance.
I think it's interesting.
Yeah, as I said, self is the ballast in the what's it? Self is the calming counter force, a ballasted boat in rough waters. So you only need self. You don't need anything else.
It's interesting. It reminds me sometimes when you hear of like mindfulness teachings, and they'll say, you only need mindfulness and all your addictions and everything will be healed, which maybe if in the very extreme case of extremely powerful self, yes, but I think there are skills to just managing attention and focus, and you know, sometimes it's better to be more future oriented, sometimes it's better to be more present, and there are or sometimes there are just physiological techniques for calming the nervous system or bringing more energy when we're too sluggish. There's so many things. So I don't know what they mean by learning. It's quite a blanket statement to
Well,
say, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Anne.
Yes.
Sarah?
Yeah, this is a very interesting idea about IFS. I'm just basing it on what you've shared. Vanna, if that's how I say your name.
Yes, Juana.
Oh,
Yeah.
Vana?
Yeah.
Vana. Thank you, Vana. So I wonder if IFS is like a balance to all the busyness of skill acquisition from other modalities like DBT and stuff like that. And so to unburden a part, if is unburdening a part done through relationship with the part? Is that not also a sort of a skill to unburden a part?
That's interesting. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Laura? Laura, you got your hand up?
I unmute. I don't agree with the author because, yeah, if a person gets access to self pretty quickly and can unblend and unburden, then other skills are not needed. But if that takes years, and in the meantime, the person is, their firefighters are coming up and they're yelling at people or whatever else, skills are needed because we need to live in the world with other people and we don't want to ruin our relationships. And um, so I think that's a misleading
Yeah,
teaching. And she's not the only person I've heard it from, but I think it's misleading.
thank you. Thank you, Laura. That's very insightful. Thank you. Sarah?
Yeah, I just was gonna add another thought, which is I'm not sure if you guys have heard of a guy named Dr. Jacob Ham. I
No.
think,
Yes,
and
I'm such a fan of Jacob Ham.
yeah, and then okay, so maybe this is, I don't know, like if this is anything to do with it, but it's kind of like, I don't know if IFS is about relationships. So I understand what people are saying, that we all need to learn new things and that could be considered a skill. But maybe IFS is about where the emphasis is placed. It's not just about checking off a checklist, but it's more about, the emphasis is on relationship and safety, emotional safety in a relationship. That's where the emphasis is. Yes, there's skills and learning along the way, but the main focus is developing the relationship and having a safe relationship. So this guy named Dr. Jacob Ham, he there's a he worked with this lady who wrote a book about her complex PTSD. And she used to be like, she's Asian and she had a major breakdown in her 30s, but she was the high performing, perfect child of the immigrant, right? And she was high functioning until everything collapsed. And so she just basically put her whole life on hold. She was working for NPR as a producer, very prestigious, very high functioning. And then she just sort of imploded, kind of. And then she worked with this Dr. Jacob Ham guy, but his main, the like, she values all the different modalities of therapy, like you name it. She learned and valued them all. But the thing that made the biggest difference for her with this guy named Dr. Jacob Ham is that he had this presence. He really entered into her experiences and he actually cried and felt emotions. Like he had this way of entering in sort of into her shared experience in a way that would be probably shocking to some of us who have all these trainings about being, not getting too enmeshed and all that. But he wasn't like that. He was affected by her stories. It moved him. And so I share that not to say IFS is like that at all, but it's maybe is IFS, the focus is on connecting with all the parts in such a way where they can unblend because finally somebody's listening to the part, like the exile, I guess. And I don't know if I'm making sense, but
Yeah.
there's something healing about somebody who's touched by my pain, not, how those old school Freudian style where you have this old school kind of therapist type, you're lying on the couch, let's say the person's lying on the couch and this very clinical, emotionally shut down therapist is writing notes, right? That's one model. But IFS, maybe it's not like that. It's about warmth and safety and relationship. That's the emphasis. And maybe there are skills, but it's it just happens along the way. It's not the main focus. It's sort of like trying to chase happiness head on doesn't work. But if you focus on contentment, it just surprises you. It's like you can't directly go after something like the skills. Maybe the skills are not as intentional. It's more about the relationship and the safety.
Brilliant. And
Yeah, Sarah, I agree with what you said. And also Dr. Ham himself uses a lot of IFS, he has said in one of those online workshops that were recorded. And it's interesting because later on the page that Vana mentioned, which was 155, they're talking about learning skills. So it is talking about, do parts learn skills? It says in parts language, skills training offers the client tools to try something different. In my view, as I expect is obvious by now, is that the client's ability to make use of these tools will depend on the willingness and cooperation of their protective parts. And then this was Vana's question about who will be responsible going forward. So yeah, I think there's two aspects, which is like Sarah's saying, I guess it's the idea that IFS is very emphasized on the heart quote skill, but it's the relational emotional contact. And so that's why they're kind of saying that's not a skill per se in a rational sense, but it is, of course, you can think it's a type of emotional skill or something that we're developing. Skill is just semantics now at this point. And on the other hand, Vana was reading from 155, and that was where I was reading from, where the author does talk about who's learning the skills, i.e. these tools. And so, yeah, this question, if we don't need young parts to learn new skills, who will learn? In my experience, older, more capable managers who are waiting in the wings, and we all have plenty of them, activate when younger parts calm down. With the self co-regulating presence, or as Linehan says, wise mind, an appropriate age hierarchy reasserts itself in the internal system, and older parts begin to bring all they have learned to the project of continuing to learn, right? So I guess counter to what we were thinking was said in the beginning of the chapter, now the author's saying the parts are continuing to learn, and now in the harmonious way that is, with a lot of self-energy and guided by self-energy. So yeah, and I think that's consistent with the idea a lot of times the managers take on new roles, right? Like, what's the role you would like to take? And then they that's the thing where they don't have to change because their purpose and their area of concern might remain the same, but just their strategies are no longer so extreme, and they can come down from their extreme roles and take on the more harmonious, useful roles, but still maybe looking out for similar areas of concern as before, but now in the harmonious way.
And my understanding is this was an example about learning, and I want to say that sometimes there are some therapists, they can be potentially. I was discussing about this recently with a friend.
Uh-huh.
So this therapist say they are IFS trained. Yet, it's only a part of them, a child part that has been trained in IFS. And they cannot be fully, don't have access to all this learning when they try to help somebody else. It sounds confusing.
Oh, can you say more again? So the therapist, you're saying, the
therapist,
therapist,
yeah. If
child.
they're very traumatized, a child part with the fears that come, you know, like the child protector part might be doing the learning.
Oh, the self still isn't there, you're saying.
The stuff is not there,
Oh, I see.
or minimum access to self. And then when they try to become a therapist, they don't have full access
Yes.
to all the qualities and to really be there for the client.
Yes. Yes. All the learning in the world doesn't make up for the lack of self. Yeah.
Oh my God, yes. And they can't even have full access to the learning. You know,
Yes. Yes.
they could have
True.
watched and learned or whatever and read and
Yes. Yes, I see what you mean. Yeah, that explains a lot actually, right? Because they have the checklist, but it's quite brittle it can be more brittle in the application. It doesn't have a full expression of the essence of it. It's just a little bit of knowledge. And then, wait, how come here they respond in a very unself-like way?
and now I'm wondering about, you know, what kind of learner parts I have.
Yeah, we can do a reflection after for all of us. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Grace is recommending a book on Amazon, What My Bones Know, a memoir of healing from complex trauma. I bought that book, I started listening to it, and I haven't finished it yet, but it's a great book by Stephanie Fu. Yeah. Okay, Marlene?
Thank you. This makes sense to me because this is for chronically dysregulated clients. And I'm also looking at page 155, which was just discussed. It makes total sense because I can identify with chronic dysregulation at points in my life, and the self may be there, but it's completely buried, inaccessible, at times a flimsy reed that comes but mostly goes. And at those times, it was useful, I remember, to automatically remember certain skills, like, okay, I can't change this. I shouldn't be fighting it. I don't need to fight it. I can accept it. And make some small changes, such, you know, like DBT or CBT. Some of those skills become an automatic behavior, and so it can override the incredible emotional turmoil that doesn't allow any reason to come in. So these parts are so blended, I'm acting completely from the part. But somewhere, and maybe this is a part of self, somewhere self comes in being maybe triggered by a skill, such as be in the now, be in the moment, noticing that I'm dwelling on the past and reliving things. So, you know, what is, again, colors? What is the color of my blanket that I'm sitting on? Doing some grounding. These skills can come automatically, and they're also described, you know, that game is a skill. I can learn to play that game. I love games. So yeah, I can relate to how these skills can help in extreme exile coming up, and protectors freaking out, and firefighters wanting to help. It's just a blended mess. It's a support. In Flemish, we have a dish called support. And everything is so mixed in that you don't see the separate part. So thank you. I'm out.
Thank you. Genevieve, do you want to go first?
Sorry, again?
Yeah, your turn. You go for it. Yeah.
I can go. Okay. I didn't really read, so I'm feeling like a bad child actually now. But I kind of love it actually. Anyway, what I was thinking is like I read very fast part of it, and something really caught my attention. My attention was caught by this blending exercises that she advised to think about, and one of them is the dial exercise. I love it because I've been using it before I was doing IFS, and I just love the idea of it. But what I found was absolutely fascinating for me is the way she talks about it. And it just reminds me of the energy of self. Like in page 160, she says, a little bit before the example, Jasmine Exile Style Down, she said, if the dial is set at 2, the exile is 20% blended and 80% unblended. If client asks the exile to set the dial at 1 or 2, but the exile wants to set it higher, negotiate. I just love the negotiate. It's always like, okay, whatever happened, just get up one floor higher and look at it from another perspective, and look at it with some kind of playful energy, some perspective, some patience, so I just loved it. And there was another part which really caught my mind. I hope I can find it now. Oh, for some reason it doesn't move. Okay. At one moment in page 161, she says, as a therapist, ask it to put the dial at 2 and see how that feels. I think it thinks I'm telling it to go away. So, like there is some conversation about that. But a few lines down, okay, wait a minute, I'm sorry. Okay, just means manager, good, but what if it can't do this all the time? What if it can't dial down all the time? And that the answer I just love. It was born with this skill. And what I'm trying to say is it's like when you are in this state of mind, like in a self state of mind, I don't know how to describe it. It's like you always rebounded back. Nothing really put, so negotiate. So and there is this hope, it is born with that. She said, like, it is born with that skill, so there's actually, it's like there is nothing that is unsolvable. That's what I feel, like this playful place and this hopeful place, and there is always something to do if we can, just breathe, pause, and look at it from higher perspective. And I just love it. Finished.
Great.
I actually had a question about that exact passage on 161, which is when they were asking about the dial from 1 to 10, there isn't, is my understanding correct that there isn't an ideal setting necessarily? It's just a way to help the client be comfortable and kind of, play with the degree of blending. So, because 1 is very low, it might be one that might be perfect for one person might be too low for someone else, and one feels like, oh, they're not being heard enough, right? So it's not that there's am I correct in understanding there's not like an optimal number per se? It's just a way of like helping have a relationship to the part and help it have control and feel safe. Is that right?
Yeah. Can I answer what I believe, what I feel? What I feel is that there is definitely no right or wrong answer. There is what the part is feeling, and what it wants to, what is it ready to dial down in order to be heard. and there is no right or wrong. First of all, it's like an invitation. Okay, so how down can you dial the volume so that I can hear you? That's the first part. And the second part is, okay, this may be still too much for me. And then it's negotiation. Can you, do you see? It's like, it's no right, it's a process.
Yeah, thank you. That makes sense. And then I had a question also about Jasmine's answer to the therapist. So on page 161, the line that you read that said, "Good, what if we can't do it all the time?" Jasmine's manager asks. The therapist said, "It was born with the skill. We can turn the dial down whenever it wants. Will there be any obstacle to turning the dial down?" And then Jasmine says, "When I feel alone, I get scared." So is Jasmine saying there that when the dial turns down, that means the anxiety part is not communicating? Then she feels alone? Or is that just kind of a something spontaneously that came out with her that doesn't directly answer the therapist's question of, is there an obstacle to turning the dial down? I guess I got confused if I'm missing something. So the therapist asked, is there any obstacle to turning the dial down? So the dial goes down. That means the anxious part, the exile, I guess, right? The anxious part is an exile, will then be more quiet. And then it feels alone. Yeah.
What I understand about it is that she's inviting other parts to check if it's okay to dial down. So she's just checking if there is resistance to dialing down. And what happens is that what I understand is the exile came up by saying, if it's too dialed down, maybe nobody will hear me. I feel alone. And then that's what she's saying. Okay, can we help the exile? But first, I think it's an invitation. It's an invitation, like we always do in IFS. Are other parts okay with us doing something? She's trying to find out if there is a resistance somewhere.
Right. So the anxious part is afraid to dial down because dialing down means feeling alone.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
then she understands that this exile is coming up and is afraid of not being heard. And then she said, okay, if we can help him. But that's the way I understand it.
That makes
I may be wrong, but that's the way I understand it.
So
but first of all, there is this invitation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, Anne.
Sorry. Yes, that makes sense. Thank you. And so just for my understanding, then the exile is saying, unless I'm screaming and blending and being very, very loud, no one will hear me and I'll be alone. That's kind of what that means.
Yeah, that's what I guess. Yeah. And so when she says, can we help him? Like when the exile is now out in the open, so can we help him?
Yes. Thank you.
Feel heard and seen and witnessed without him having to scream.
Yes. Thank you. That's super helpful.
Sarah's got her hand up.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there's maybe we're all just talking about the same thing, just from different angles, maybe with the dial and the resistance to the dial going down. I wonder if there are some exiles that, there's that saying that says, if a tree falls in a forest, if nobody hears it, did the tree fall down, right? And I wonder if the exile feels like, after being not heard, it's maybe its whole life, or who knows for how long, it's carrying this event, this memory, or this message, or they're protecting something that nobody's seen and heard. But maybe it's not just about somebody saying, yeah, okay, that happened, right? It's more about, does the other part understand the significance of the event? It's not just that an event happened, but do you understand really how it affected me? Do you understand the breadth and depth of the horrible event? Because some people on the listening side are very dismissive, right? Oh yeah, get over it, that kind of thing. And so maybe some of the exiles are, the reason why the dial won't go down either is it's not just enough to give lip service, or it feels like it's dismissed and not really, it's like it's not a true listening of the part, right? So it doesn't get the full attention at a lower volume level. So it's amping it up because nobody is giving this certain type of quality of attention and listening, maybe.
So I agree that you need to communicate with that part. So how I'm seeing this now, I didn't think of it, Genevieve. You mentioned about the anxious part protecting maybe a scared part that is alone and scared, potentially. So there could be another part. So they all need to be. We need that communication and understanding of the system. Initially, I thought the anxious part felt scared and lonely, but maybe not. Maybe it's pointing to another, to the exile. And I think, I think parts want to feel safe. They want to feel heard. So we could even ask them, negotiate with them. What do you think it's possible for you to turn down the dial by, a little bit? And what do you need? Do you need me to talk to you like more self-presence, more breathing, yoga? What do you need for? What do you want me to promise that I will come back to you tomorrow? So there could be so many options. If you engage in a dialogue with the part of yourself, of your system, they might tell you that if you come back to me tomorrow and you keep your promise, I will turn the dial down. So you can get on with, with your job or your kids, with your cooking. So, yeah. Does that make sense at all?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it makes sense. It is a negotiation because it's actually not to say that the exile is like a hostage negotiation with the FBI, but it is kind of because, there's certain shows where you see the really good negotiators. They're not just running through a bunch of skills, they're actually having to build a bond with that individual. But it's not just a skill, it's a quality of the person talking to that part, because I've heard it said in other, that some people have such a amazing presence in how they listen to others. That is what often is the thing that will help the protective part release the clutching of the dial, right?
Yeah.
It's when they really feel like, so they do want to be heard, but to be truly heard, believe it or not, like to feel like somebody really gets them or understands them is not always the easiest thing to do. Like, it's not just let's talk tomorrow necessarily. It's also a quality in the therapists in terms of how much they can really listen. I don't know if I'm making sense, but I think for me, I find some of the more skill-based therapeutic models, CBT and things like that, it's so logical and analytical kind of. That's why maybe IFS is a bit different, because it is about how the therapist is present with the other person, right? It's not about force, it is good to have the time and the space to listen and be there for your client, but it's also, as a therapist, I would want to make sure I'm feeling relaxed and I've released the stress I had, in the traffic and stuff, so I can be there for the client, because those things, like, I could be emotionally present, because those qualities come through in how I work with a client that has these types of exiles, because usually those types of exiles are very sensitive. They know when they have the full attention of the therapist, like they're very attuned to that. They can tell when people aren't fully paying attention. Like it's not even like we're human, right? We'll do our best, but I'm just saying like some exiles are like that.
Great, thank you. Genevieve?
Yes, when you were speaking, what I was feeling, I was thinking about mirror neurons. I was thinking if a part of me is screaming and I scream back at it, then there will be a lot of screaming. But if a part of me is screaming and self gets in and is very quiet and the tone is getting very soft and the openness, I nearly want to say the openness of a soul, of self is so present, then I believe it is a way to help whichever part it is that is screaming, to just tone down, be calm, because if you're screaming and I talk to you softly, at one point you will stop screaming. That's what I believe. And it's not that I'm asking you to stop screaming by forcing you. It's just that I'm lowering down my tension just to be totally open to you. And I think that's what self is doing, and that was a good therapist is trying to do. It's just like, okay, I hear you. Don't say, okay, I hear you. No, I hear you. I'm here with you. And I speak like that. I don't think parts of people, whatever parts of people, we keep screaming. It's kind of difficult. It just lowers the energy to a healthy energy. I that's what I believe. Anyway.
Great, thank you. I have some thoughts about, Sarah, you're talking about the relationship with the therapist. And I've just recently had some training. The trainer was Francois de Ledos. He's got a new model and he's going to have a book out soon. He uses IFS and the polyvagal theory. He calls his approach the relational intelligence model. It's very interesting because when he does IFS with people, like one of the questions he asks is, how safe do you feel with me? With me as your therapist. He even changes his seat, next to the client, behind the client, and asks that question. How safe do you feel with me? So the relationship, because trauma happened in a relationship. The relationship wasn't there or something. So healing happens in a relationship. So that's what. And if we go back to chapter 9, right at the beginning, so it talks about what's the difference with IFS and other modalities. Like it says from the beginning, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, EMDR, for example, instructs clients to see traumatic experience as a movie. So you see it separate from itself. Here it is your trauma. But with IFS, we want a little distance and a lot of connection. So it's not like a movie. She says it's like a theater. And in that theater, in that little part, further down, halfway, the therapist, she says, I, as a therapist, sit in the dark, acting as the self for our collective system entirely by feel and report until the client's self takes over. So there's a very active role of the therapist when the client hasn't got access to self, then the therapist is there. It's a relational model. Sarah, does that make any sense a little bit? Even though it's not like, have you heard of the Francois Ledos
Yeah, I like, thank you for sharing that. I'll definitely look into it. And yeah, I like that. That's a great way to kind of look at all the modalities of using the movie theater analogy, right? Like I could go through the whole list, right? Where's DBT in the movie theater, right? Like what part of the movie process is DBT? You know, maybe it's behind the scenes where the
Yeah.
camera director's giving instructions, you know, maybe it's more technical, you know?
Yeah, well, she says, Martha Sweezy, she says, you know, EMDR is more, and other therapists, they are more like you are more cut off. You are watching as a movie, not as a what's called improvisation. You don't you're not
No
involved in that
improvising.
theater.
Yeah.
Theater. It's not a movie. IFS is a theater, not a movie. Yeah.
Live
Yeah.
theater. Live
Yeah,
theater.
where self takes center. Yes, it's called the spotlight. If he wants in.
Right.
And before you get to the theater to have that, you know, interaction with parts, self might be in the lobby. Yeah, not ready to go in yet.
Oh, yeah, true.
It's yeah. So
Maybe they don't have a ticket yet. Maybe they don't want to buy a ticket even. You
yeah,
know, they're
not
just
ready.
sure. Yeah.
It's a great
Love
metaphor. Yeah. Yeah. So it's just at the beginning of the chapter 9 Unblend. It talks about it.
Nice. Thank you. That's a great analogy. I think, yeah, somebody else mentioned that too in the chat.
Yeah, yeah. Genevieve says it's a great metaphor. And, you know, I really like that. Says I have just one goal as a therapist. I want them to acknowledge the client's self. I want the client's parts to acknowledge self. That's one goal. That's what the therapist's goal is. Yeah, page 143. Yeah. So it's a very relational within the system and outside the system with the therapist. Because if the client doesn't have self, then the therapist's self will step in to support. So
Yeah.
the trust and the safety.
Wow. Very, yeah, very, it illuminates things really nicely, you know, it works. Yeah. I love that. Thank you.
Great. Okay. I have one more little thing, page 167. It's about language. And it says, right at the top, therapist, we don't need him to change. He can just relax and try something new. Oh, and right at the top it says, protectors often respond negatively to the word change. So instead of change, use try something new. So when you offer something to, you know, to a protector, instead of saying to the protector, change, stop being anxious, okay? Do something else, change. Instead of saying that, then language is important also in IFS, yeah? It looks like Martha Sweezy here identified that change has got negative connotations. Page 167, right at the top. Yes. So have you guys thought about that? Instead of saying change, try something new. You know, I'm not sure. This is kind of like, I like that. Yet a lot of clients, they come in and they say, I want to change. I don't want that addiction. I want to change. But their protectors, their parts, they kind of like don't like that. They're resistant to that. Yeah.
You know what I love about it, Vanna? It's like when you tell somebody change, it's like we have a feeling that we have to do something to destroy something in us and do something different. But when you say try something new, it's like we don't have to do anything with what is already here. We just have to add something new, which I think is wonderful. Yes, it makes a lot of difference in the feeling, in the general feeling. I love it.
Great, thank you, Genevieve. And Grace, she mentioned, instead of like, trying something new, asking, what role would you prefer? Yeah.
Or maybe would you like to make some experiment with me?
Yes,
would you like to experiment something else? Like if there's something very energizing about this kind of new experiment, or
Yeah.
And very not pathologizing. Yes.
I remember Dick Swartz in one of his books, he mentions about the hypothetical questions. What if, rather than saying change,
Yeah.
Thank you. Guys, I have one more topic I would like us to explore because we talked about it before and we had different opinions. And it's about willingness. And that's page 149. Unblending and willingness. That's the subtitle. If that is okay for us to move, if we're complete there, can we move to the willingness for a little while? So yeah, it says here all parts can unblend, but they have to be willing. So some people before, when we had a discussion, they thought no, because some parts are not able. It's not about willingness. So I'm not, what do you think about that? When a part doesn't unblend, is it because they're not willing or not able? Now, as I'm asking this question, I do have like an answer in my head, and I'm gonna kind of like say what I'm thinking. Is parts are not willing because something stops them, another part stops them. So I think I can't and I'm not willing can be intermingled. I don't know.
I think if a part is not willing, then it has a good reason.
It has a good reason. It has a good
reason that we have to understand what. And if it's not capable, then we also have to understand why and to build the skills in order to do that. In any case, I don't really, I don't know the answer. I mean, I don't know if it's not willing or not. In any case, it needs our attention, our understanding, our compassion, our curiosity. Okay, why is it that you're unwilling? What are you scared would happen if you did? So, and if it's not capable, so then how can we build that? How can we
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. So yeah, Mark.
Yeah, all parts can unblend, but they have to be willing. But the next sentence sounds like the therapist, like Martha Sweezy is saying, it's important to remember that they always have reasons. I'm not willing because I don't think I can do it. I don't think it's possible. This is too deep of a habit in my life. And then she says, we have to remember they have reasons. There will be reasons, but we, the therapist, have a job, which is to discover and address their reasons effectively and respectfully. So like I may say, I have a part of me that just loses my temper. especially in traffic in my car, when somebody tailgates me, when somebody cuts me off, all these things. I can't unblend from that. I just can't do it. I can't do it. So my therapist would have to, show, maybe it's because I don't think it's possible. It's a habit that I picked up from being a young child, watching my parents lose their temper about little things. It's too deeply a part of me. I take pride in it, maybe, and I don't even want to get rid of it or something. But so I don't, all parts can unblend, but they have to be willing. There has to be a willingness to change. And so if there isn't, that second sentence says it all. It's important to remember they always have reasons, and we, the therapist, have a job, which is to discover and address the reasons effectively and respectfully. So, and then the issue of habits, deeply ingrained habits that you picked up from other people, from your parents, from all the messages that this society gives us. Protectors often cite habit as a way of maintaining the status quo. And it's a protective cover, she says, but habit, I mean, you could probably find several hundred books on habit and how to change habits and get rid of bad habits and making a new good habit. So there's lots of issues in here about the unblending and willingness.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah.
It's complex. And great that you've read that sentence. It makes sense. And, I think somebody's system, if it's very traumatized, then, that's why IFS has got this direct access, because they can't unblend. They may want to, in the moment when you are in this traffic jam and you get angry, you really seriously you're so triggered, you cannot unblend. But hopefully when you go and see your therapist, that part, and it's willing, because normally the parts that blend with us, they don't really enjoy what they're doing. They're so extreme, they don't enjoy that intense feelings, experience. So then with the therapist, and if they're willing, and slowly with direct access and whatever other techniques IFS has, then you can unblend and help them. So I'm complete, and I wonder if there's anything else before we close our recorded session. If there's nothing else, we can close now. Yeah. Till next time, chapter 10 next time.